Claire had always imagined marriage would bring warmth and laughter, but her house was too quiet most days. She'd been married to Mark for 2 years now, and though he was kind, his life revolved around work. He left early, came home late, and often brought paperwork to the dinner table. It wasn't that he didn't care. He was simply the kind of man who expressed love through responsibility, not affection. Claire understood that, but still. There were nights when the silence felt heavier than she could bear. Ethan. Her 17-year-old stepson made the house feel even quieter. He was polite but distant, always tucked away in his room at the far end of the hallway. He didn't dislike her at least, not openly, but his words were few. And his tone was always careful, as if he was unsure how to behave around her. Claire couldn't blame him. She had entered his life suddenly, becoming his stepmother after years of him living alone with his father. That kind of change didn't come easy for anyone. The weather that day matched her mood, gray, heavy, and uncertain. Claire had come home early from work because the rain had started to pour and the roads were flooding. The sound of raindrops on the roof followed her as she stepped inside, hanging her wet coat by the door. "Mark," she called out. No answer. Of course not. He'd told her he'd be at the office late again. She slipped off her shoes and walked down the hall. The lights were dim, the air filled with the faint scent of coffee and rain. From behind Ethan's closed door came the soft strum of guitar strings, uneven but gentle. For a moment she smiled. It was rare to hear any sound from his room other than the muffled noise of video games. But suddenly the sound stopped. There was a sharp snap, followed by a deep sigh. Then silence again. Claire hesitated. She didn't want to intrude, but something in the sound made her worry. She knocked lightly. "Ethan, you okay in there?" No response. She opened the door just a crack. Ethan sat on his bed, shoulders slumped, staring down at a broken guitar string in his hands. His room was neat, surprisingly neat for a teenager book stacked on his desk. A few posters on the wall, and his guitar lying across his lap like something fragile. He looked up, startled. "Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you knock." "I was just checking if everything was okay," Claire said, stepping inside carefully. "I heard something snap." He gave a small laugh, embarrassed. "Yeah, my guitar string broke. Again. Guess I pulled it too hard." She smiled softly. "Well, that's better than what I thought. You sounded frustrated." Ethan shrugged, trying to hide his disappointment. "I've been trying to get this song right for days. Every time I feel close, something goes wrong." Claire moved closer, her eyes landing on the worn guitar. It was an old acoustic, the kind that carried stories in its scratches. "I used to play a little," she said quietly. "My dad loved music. He taught me a few things when I was your age." He looked up, surprised. "Really? I didn't know that." She chuckled. "I'm full of secrets." For the first time, Ethan smiled. It was small, shy, but genuine, the kind of smile that reminded her he was still a boy trying to find his place in a world that felt too big. She sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to get too close. "Want me to help you fix it?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, if you know how." She reached for the spare string he handed her. Her hands trembled slightly. She hadn't done this in years. The guitar felt different from the one she'd grown up with. But the feeling of the strings, the scent of the old wood, brought back memories of her father sitting beside her. Teaching her chords on quiet evenings, Ethan watched as she worked, his expression soft. "You're really careful with it," he said. "Every guitar deserves respect," she replied with a small laugh. "They carry feelings, not just notes." He looked at her, puzzled but curious. "What do you mean?" Claire tied the new string slowly, keeping her eyes on the guitar. "When you play, the guitar feels what you feel. If you're angry, it sounds rough. If you're sad, it sounds lonely. But when you play with heart, it remembers." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's kind of true. I never thought of it that way." For a while, they worked in silence, only the sound of the rain filling the room. Claire showed him how to tighten the tuning peg, how to check the tension. Their fingers brushed once, and both drew back slightly, unsure of what to say. It wasn't awkward exactly, just unfamiliar. There was a warmth in the moment, something quiet but real. When the last string was in place, Claire handed him the guitar. "Try it now." Ethan strummed softly, the sound bright and clean. His face lit up. "It works. Thank you." "You did most of it," she said. "I just helped." He glanced at her, then looked away still. "No one's really helped me with stuff like this before." Her heart tugged a little. "Everyone needs help sometimes, Ethan. Even grown-ups." "Quoi?" He smiled again, softer this time. "Guess so." Just then, the sound of a car engine rolled into the driveway. Mark was home. The warmth in the air seemed to shift, replaced by something heavier. Ethan quickly set the guitar aside and stood up. Brushing his hands on his jeans, Claire stood too, her smile fading into something more polite. "Your dad's back." "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "Thanks again, Claire, really." She nodded and stepped out of the room, closing the door halfway behind her as she walked toward the kitchen. She could still hear the faint echo of the last chord Ethan had played. It lingered in her mind a small, hopeful sound in a house that had forgotten how to feel alive. When Mark entered, he kissed her on the cheek, distracted, already talking about deadlines and clients. She smiled and nodded, pretending to listen, but her thoughts were still upstairs. That evening, as she washed the dishes, she heard the faint strumming of a guitar again. Ethan was playing the same melody, smoother this time, his voice humming quietly through the walls. For the first time in months, the silence in the house didn't feel lonely. It felt alive, like something was slowly healing. Claire didn't know what that meant or where it would lead. But she knew one thing for sure. She had seen a different side of Ethan that day. Not just a quiet boy hidden behind closed doors, but someone with music, heart, and a story of his own waiting to be heard. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something their little family had been missing. Connection born not from obligation, but from understanding. The rain outside kept falling, steady and calm, as if washing away the distance that had settled between them for so long. The rain didn't stop that night. It kept falling in soft waves, tapping against the windows and filling the house with a sound both peaceful and lonely. Claire couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan sitting there on his bed, holding his guitar, his face full of quiet sadness. There had been something unspoken in that moment of feeling that didn't belong to words, only to silence. By morning, the rain had faded into mist. Mark had already left for work, leaving a note on the counter and a cold cup of coffee. Claire stood by the kitchen window, sipping her tea and staring at the gray light outside. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Ethan appeared, still sleepy, wearing an old hoodie and holding his guitar case. "Morning," she said softly. "Hey," he murmured. "I'm going to head to the park for a bit. I like playing there when it's quiet." Claire nodded. "It's still a little wet out." "You sure?" He shrugged. "Yeah, the sound's better in the open." Something in his tone made her smile. She saw a spark in him that hadn't been there before. "All right? Just don't stay out too long, okay?" He nodded and left, the front door closing gently behind him. The house returned to silence again. But this time it felt different, less heavy, more thoughtful. Claire found herself walking into the living room, remembering how her own father had taught her guitar. She hadn't played since college. Life, work, marriage, they had all taken that joy away. But Ethan had reminded her of something she didn't know she missed. When Ethan returned later that afternoon, he looked calmer, more at peace. His shoes were muddy, his hands cold, but his eyes had a brightness that hadn't been there before. "The new string's holding up," he said with a grin. "Glad to hear it," she replied, smiling back. "You sounded good this morning." He blinked, surprised. "You heard me." "I did," she admitted. "You're talented, Ethan. You really are." He looked down, cheeks slightly red. "Thanks. I'm not that good yet. But I like it. It helps me. I don't know. Think." Claire tilted her head. "Or stop thinking." He laughed quietly. "Maybe both." That small exchange broke something open between them, a wall that had stood since the day she married his father. From then on, little things began to change. Ethan started spending more time outside his room. Sometimes he'd bring his guitar into the living room and play softly while Claire cooked dinner. Sometimes she'd ask him about the songs he was learning, and he'd tell her stories behind them old bands. Classic lyrics, things Mark never had time for. One Saturday, Mark had to leave for a business trip. He kissed Claire goodbye at the door, promising to call that night. The moment his car disappeared down the road, the house fell into its usual quiet again. Claire turned to find Ethan standing in the hallway, guitar in hand. "Do you mind if I play a bit in the kitchen?" he asked. She smiled. "Not at all. It'll make this place feel less empty." He sat by the window while she cooked. The smell of roasted vegetables mixed with the soft strumming of his guitar. The moment felt strangely natural, like a family scene that had always existed but had been missing its melody until now. "What's that song?" she asked, turning from the stove. "Something I've been writing," he said. "It's not done yet. Can I hear it?" He hesitated. "It's kind of personal." "Then it must be good," she said gently. He smiled shyly and began to play. The notes were simple, quiet, but each one carried emotion. His voice was low and uncertain at first, but as he continued, it grew stronger. The lyrics spoke of someone lost in the noise of the world, trying to find a reason to keep believing in small things: sunlight through the rain, kindness from strangers, a hand that helps when no one else sees. Claire stopped stirring for a moment, her throat tight. The song wasn't just music, it was honesty. When he finished, she clapped softly. "That was beautiful, Ethan." He looked up, embarrassed. "It's not done still," she said. "It made me feel something. That means it's already good." He grinned a little, then went quiet. For a moment, their eyes met and neither looked away. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was human. Two people, different ages. Bound not by family titles, but by shared loneliness. Later that evening, thunder rolled again in the distance. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, restringing another guitar string that had loosened. Claire joined him, holding the flashlight for him. "You're patient with this," she said. He shrugged. "It's easier to fix than people, I guess." Her chest tightened at his words. "Maybe," she whispered, "but sometimes people just need someone to try." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a brief second, she saw how much he resembled Mark Hand, yet how much softer he was. There was a quiet strength in him, a gentleness that his father had long buried under years of routine. As the night grew darker, they talked. About small things: music, school, her old guitar, her life before she met Mark. Claire laughed more than she had in months. Ethan smiled more than she'd ever seen him. It was easy, effortless, natural. When the rain picked up again, they moved to the couch. She wrapped herself in a blanket while Ethan kept playing. His music filled the room, warm and alive, chasing away the sound of thunder. At one point, Claire closed her eyes, listening. The melody reminded her of something she couldn't name, maybe the feeling of being understood, even without words. When he stopped playing, she opened her eyes and said softly, "You have a gift. Ethan, don't let it go." He smiled faintly. "Thanks for helping me that day. I probably wouldn't have touched my guitar again if you hadn't." She shook her head. "You would have. You just needed someone to remind you it mattered." The clock ticked quietly in the background. It was late, but neither wanted the evening to end. Finally, she stood up, stretching. "You should get some sleep." "Yeah," he said, though his voice sounded reluctant as she walked down the hallway. She glanced back once. Ethan was still sitting there, guitar resting on his knee, staring out the window into the rain. That image stayed with her long after she went to bed. She lay awake, listening to the soft sound of his music drifting through the walls again, like a secret lullaby. Something inside her stirred, not love, not in the romantic sense, but something just as deep. It was connection, care. A shared longing between two people who had both been quietly forgotten in their own home, for the first time since marrying Mark. Claire didn't feel invisible. She felt seen through Ethan's music, through the way he listened. through the small moments that had slowly stitched warmth back into her days, and though she didn't realize it yet, that single rainy evening, their shared laughter, their soft words, and the song that filled the silence would become the beginning of something that changed both of them forever. Because sometimes, it's not the big moments that bring people together. It's the small ones, the quiet help, the simple kindness, the music that fills an empty space and says what hearts are too afraid to speak aloud. Dinner that night was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet Claire had grown used to. It wasn't cold or distant, it was thoughtful. The kind of silence that comes when people are thinking of the same thing but don't dare to speak it aloud. Mark sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone between bites, talking briefly about an upcoming business deal. Claire smiled when he looked up, nodding in the right places, pretending to follow every word. Ethan, on the other hand, ate slowly, eyes on his plate, but occasionally his gaze would lift toward her. Each time, he quickly looked away. The small moments between them had changed everything. Ever since that rainy evening, the air in the house carried something newer, quiet awareness. They didn't talk about it. They didn't need to. It showed in the small glances. In the way Ethan no longer disappeared into his room immediately after meals. And in how Claire's tone softened whenever she spoke to him. It was a fragile peace, one that neither dared to name. A few days later, Mark left again for another work trip. He kissed Claire goodbye, told her he'd call from the hotel, and reminded Ethan to focus on his exams. The moment the car drove away, the house seemed to exhale. Claire didn't realize how much tension she held until then. The ticking clock felt louder. The rooms felt bigger. That evening, Ethan stayed in the living room, playing his guitar softly while Claire folded laundry nearby. He played with ease, now gentler, smoother, like he was finally comfortable being heard. Claire caught herself smiling at the sound. There was something healing about it. "Sounds beautiful," she said without looking up. Ethan paused mid-note. "Thanks. It's a new song. Another one of yours?" He nodded. "Yeah, I've been writing a lot lately. It helps clear my head." Claire folded the last shirt and sat across from him. "Music has that magic, doesn't it? It's like, it says what we can't." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, like when words just don't work." Their eyes met for a brief second, and Claire looked away first. The rain had stopped outside, but her heart felt like it was still echoing with the sound of it. She couldn't explain it, this growing closeness that wasn't supposed to be there. She cared for Ethan deeply, but it wasn't just the kind of care a stepmother felt for her stepson. It was more emotional, more fragile, born out of understanding, not duty. Later that night, she sat on the couch reading. Ethan walked in, holding a folded piece of paper. "Hey, Claire," he said quietly. I wrote something. Can I show you?" She set the book aside. "Of course." He handed her the note. On it were a few handwritten lyrics. The words spoke of a person who came into his life when everything felt numb. Someone who reminded him how to feel again. How to see beauty in small things. When she looked up, Ethan's face was flushed. "It's not about anyone specific," he said quickly. "Just how I've been feeling." Claire's throat tightened, but she nodded gently. "It's honest. That's what makes it beautiful." He smiled in relief. "Thanks. I didn't think anyone would understand it." She wanted to say, "I do." But instead, she said softly, "You have a gift. Ethan, keep writing." From that night onward, something subtle but powerful began to grow. Ethan started leaving his door open when he played. Sometimes Claire would walk past and pause for a few seconds, pretending to adjust a vase or tidy up just to listen. Other times, she'd leave little notes for him, simple things like "Great melody tonight" or "That song made me smile." He'd find them and leave a quiet thank you note in return. It became their unspoken language. One afternoon, Mark called from his trip. His voice was rushed, distracted. "I'll be gone a few more days, Claire. Sorry about that." The client's demanding. "It's fine," she said softly, staring at the kitchen window where sunlight filtered through. "Just focus on your work." After the call, she sat at the table for a long time, feeling the weight of the silence settle around her again. It wasn't just loneliness, it was the ache of being unseen. Mark had always been good to her, but he never really looked at her anymore. He had his routines, his goals, his deadlines. And she had become another quiet detail in his busy life. That evening, she found Ethan in the backyard, sitting on the steps, guitar beside him. The golden light of the setting sun touched his face, and he looked peaceful, almost older than his years. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. He shook his head. Not at all. They sat in silence for a while, watching the light fade. "You ever feel like you're living next to someone, not with them?" he asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. "All the time," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "Dad's always busy. I know he tries, but it's like he doesn't really see anyone anymore." She sighed. "I know what you mean." Ethan turned to her then, his eyes steady and full of quiet understanding. "You make the house feel different, you know? Like it's not just walls anymore." Claire felt her chest tighten, warmth and sadness mixing inside her. "Thank you, Ethan," she said softly. "That means more than you know." He smiled faintly and picked up his guitar, strumming a slow tune. The melody drifted through the yard, wrapping around them like a shared secret. When the last chord faded, he looked at her again and said, "I wrote that one yesterday. It's called Home." She blinked back, the emotion rising in her eyes. "It's perfect." That night, Claire couldn't sleep again. She lay in bed, listening to the rain that had started once more. Mark had texted a short goodnight, "Love you," but the words felt empty, like something said out of habit. Meanwhile, upstairs, the faint sound of Ethan's music filled the air again, steady and soft like a heartbeat. It wasn't wrong, she told herself. What she felt was care, deep, motherly affection, maybe mixed with something she couldn't name. It wasn't romantic. It was emotional. Two lonely people finding understanding in a home that had forgotten warmth. Over the next few days, that quiet bond only grew stronger. Sometimes she'd find Ethan in the kitchen early, making coffee. Sometimes he'd ask her opinion on his lyrics. Sometimes their conversations lasted longer than they meant to, slipping into stories, laughter, and small, comfortable silences. But even with the laughter, there was always a line neither of them crossed, a quiet respect, an awareness that this closeness was fragile and needed to stay pure. Still, their feeling lingered, the sense that both of them had found something in each other that life had taken away too soon. And as autumn slowly began to color the trees outside, Claire realized the truth she'd been avoiding. She looked forward to the moments with Ethan more than anything else in her days. His music, his voice, his gentle way of being, it all reminded her of the part of herself she had forgotten existed. But deep down, she knew this quiet peace couldn't last forever, because someday Mark would come home for good. And the silence in the house would return, not empty this time, but filled with everything that would forever remain unsaid. The first chill of autumn had settled over the small town, painting the trees gold and red. Mornings were quieter now, the air crisp and full of calm. Mark had been home for a week after his trip, and though he tried to bring cheer into the house, the distance between them all was hard to ignore. Claire had become good at hiding her emotions, smiling when she needed to, speaking softly, never revealing what her heart carried. But every time she passed by Ethan's room and heard the faint hum of his guitar, something inside her stirred again, a mix of warmth and ache she couldn't quite name. One Saturday afternoon, Mark had to leave once more for a weekend meeting. The moment the front door closed, the air shifted back to that gentle quietness Claire had begun to recognize, peaceful but full of unspoken things. She made tea, opened the windows to let in the scent of fallen leaves, and tried to distract herself with a book. But her thoughts kept drifting upstairs. After a while, she heard the familiar tune of a guitar. The melody was slower this time, soft, emotional, like a story told without words. She followed the sound until she reached Ethan's half-open door. He sat by the window, sunlight catching the edges of his hair, eyes focused on the strings. "Can I listen?" she asked quietly. He looked up, startled for a moment, then smiled. "Of course. I was actually hoping you would." She stepped inside and sat on the chair near his desk, folding her hands in her lap. "Is it another new song?" He nodded, nervous but excited. "Yeah, I've been working on it for a while. I finally finished it last night. I'd love to hear it." Ethan took a deep breath and began to play. The notes were slow at first, then grew into something richer, deeper. The song was full of longing, of someone searching for meaning, for understanding, for warmth in a cold house. His voice joined the melody, gentle but steady. And his lyrics told a story that hit Claire's heart with every word. He sang about a woman who came into his world quietly and changed it without trying. Someone who reminded him what kindness felt like. Someone who made an empty house feel like home again. By the time the song ended, Claire's eyes were wet. She didn't move for a long time, the silence between them carrying all the words they couldn't say. "It's beautiful," she whispered finally. Ethan looked down, his cheeks flushed. "I wasn't sure if I should sing it. It's kind of personal. It's honest," she said softly. "That's what makes it special." He nodded but didn't meet her eyes. "It's about gratitude. About how one person can change everything just by caring." She smiled gently, though her chest felt heavy. "Then I hope she knows how lucky she is to be the reason behind such a song." Ethan looked up at her, and for a brief second their eyes met, full of emotion, of things neither dared to put into words. Then he looked away, laughing awkwardly. "Thanks, Claire. I just wanted you to hear it." She stood, brushing away a tear she hoped he didn't see. "Thank you for sharing it with me, Ethan. It means a lot." The moment passed, quiet but deep. Claire left the room, but the melody stayed with her. She carried it through the rest of the day, humming it under her breath as she cooked dinner, cleaned the counters, and watched the sky darken outside. It wasn't just a song, it was a piece of truth. A reflection of the fragile bond that had formed between two people who'd both been invisible for too long. That evening, Mark called. His voice was cheerful, talking about the meeting and the new business partner he'd met. Claire answered kindly, as always. But part of her mind drifted elsewhere, to the soft song that had filled Ethan's room earlier. When the call ended, she sat in silence, staring at her reflection in the kitchen window. She saw a woman who looked calm, composed, but whose eyes told a different story. Somewhere along the way, she had found comfort in the wrong place. Or maybe not wrong, just unexpected. Ethan hadn't given her love in the romantic sense. He had given her something rarer: understanding, attention. A reminder that she still, mattered. The days that followed were quieter. Ethan didn't talk about the song again, but she could tell it lingered between them. Sometimes he'd play it softly in the evenings. And sometimes she'd pause in the hallway, listening from afar, her heart full and conflicted all at once. One morning, as she was leaving for work, she found a folded piece of paper on the kitchen counter. It was Ethan's handwriting. "Claire, thank you for everything. I don't always say it, but you've made this place feel like home again. The song is